We've already seen a simple example as to how to bind an event handler to a particular element. I'm located right now in the index.html in the lecture 54 folder. Let me go ahead and close the file browser so we could see a little bit better. So you remember this HTML document, we had a button in the middle of here that says unclick equals say hello. And as you can remember, when we entered some name over here and clicked say it, it will say hello Yaakov using this say hello function. I'd like to explore now a couple of different ways that you could actually assign event handlers to elements. Now, first of all, what are event handlers? Well, event handlers are basically functions that you bind using specific methods to certain events that happen in the browser. Now, those events might be triggered by just a lifecycle, meaning something like the page loaded. That's an event. Or it could be triggered by user interaction, like a user typed a character or a user clicked something. So one of the most simplest ways to assign an event handler to a particular element is to just use the onSomething attribute on that element. So here we could see that we're using onClick and we say hello, executing that JavaScript function say hello. But the truth is, if you take a look, there's a whole bunch of these, and they really have to do with keyboard and mouse events as well as focus events. So for example, onBlur means when this particular element loses focus. So I can actually go to my input field here and say onBlur, and we'll say hello. Well, the same function will execute when I type something in here. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser. And I'll say Yaakov, and the second I lose the focus from here, like that, so let's go ahead and save our index.html, and this will get reloaded. So if I go and type in Yaakov, and the second this field loses focus, and you'll see that say hello will get executed, and hello Yaakov will appear. So let's actually erase that for a minute so we don't crowd our space here. So placing an onClick on onBlur or on some event straight on the HTML is one option. Now that option comes with some side effects. One side effect is that you kind of have to dirty up your HTML with these onClick, onBlur, onKeyDown, and so on these events. And typically, and as we've been speaking about it before, HTML is really just for content. It's not really there for behavior. So that's one difference. Second difference, let's go ahead and save that. Second difference is this. If we go to the say hello function, which is what we're executing when somebody clicks the say it button, and we go ahead and console.log this. What is this pointing to? Let's go ahead and save that, and we don't have to even enter anything here. We'll just click say it. And it's apparently pointing to the window object. So why is that? Well, since this say hello function is being defined in the global context, it makes perfect sense that when we say this will be pointing, again, to the global context, which is the window object. And since in here we're not doing anything at all by assigning this to this onClick attribute, we're not doing anything at all to change that context for this hello function, we actually are executing it right here. So that remains the same. However, there's a different way of doing the same thing, that is binding this function to the click event. Let's go ahead and take a look at another way of doing this. In this way, it's called unobtrusive event binding. And the reason that's called that way is because the HTML doesn't really need to know anything about your JavaScript. So let's go ahead and go to the HTML, and let's go ahead and erase this out of here. So now the HTML doesn't know anything about the click handler. Let's save that. Go to the script, and here's what we're doing here. We're saying document query selector button, so we selected that element, and we're calling this function called add event listener, and we're saying that I want you to listen for the click event, and when that happens, I want you to use this function expression or this function value, which is say hello, which is pointing to our say hello function. Now when we do this, let's take a look as to what this now is going to point to. Let's go ahead and let's save the script, and let's go ahead and click say. And obviously we didn't provide anything, but as you could see, this now is pointing to the actual button. And that makes perfect sense since we're passing the value of this function into this particular element. So this element button gets a call called add event listener, and inside of that call, we somehow assign this say hello to its event. So therefore, this variable is now pointing at the containing object, which at this point is the button element. Now there's a similar way to assign that click handler, except using the onClick property. Let's go ahead and comment this out and uncomment this line right here. And I can see there's a typo in here. It really should be onClick. So point is, whatever the on click, on blur, on something that you have available on the element itself, you could use that as a property of the object that you selected. So in this case, we're selecting again the element object, and we're setting its on click property to be the value of the function say hello. Again, it's just a value. We're not providing parentheses here after the function. We're not executing it. We're just setting its value to it. So what do you think the say hello function is going to say when we say console.log this? Well, since this is pointing or is being executed inside of an object that is the button object, when we go ahead and click say, it's going to be once again a button object. And you know, while this way might seem a little bit more complicated to assign event handlers than simply just saying on click over here, it does provide us a little bit more flexibility. Let me show you what I mean. So let me go ahead and comment this out and leave just the add event listener way of editing the click event. So what I'm going to do now is I would like to do is as I'm typing this, when I say Yakov and I click say it, I want the name of the button or the label of the button to change. Well, that's very easy to do if the this variable inside of the event handler already points directly to the target element that you're working on. So let's go ahead and go here and say that when this happens, I'm going to go ahead and say this dot text content equals to set it. So we're going to say that the button set it already. So when I save this, and I say Yakov, and when I click say it, it will change to set it. And that's a much more convenient way of doing things instead of having to once again select using the query API, select this button and change its label. And that's because in this JavaScript, I don't really have to know what triggered the click event. If I had to do it the other way, I would have to know that the button is the one that triggered the click event. In this case, I don't need to know that. I just need to know that something that has text content triggered that particular event. Let's discuss one more event that is a lifecycle event of the page that will let us actually assign the events to the elements of the page once they load, but before anything else loads, before any images load, before any CSS loads, and so forth. And since we're going to be listening for that event, we no longer need to provide this script at the bottom of the page. We can actually cut the script out of here and place it very easily in the head. And let's save that. And now what we need to do is we need to actually listen for a particular event on the browser lifecycle. And that event is called, let's say, document.addEventListener, and the event is called DOM content loaded. And what we want to do is we want to assign a function. Let's go ahead and put our semicolon. And what we want to do is we want to assign a function, and we need a name. And every event handler function gets this event object. So, and inside this function, we can now start assigning different events. So what we can do now is we can create this function hello and grab this whole text right here, cut it out, and place it right here. And maybe move it over a little bit. Okay. So now we have the entire function sitting inside of addEventListener, and it will get executed. This function will get executed when this event fires called DOM content loaded. And that will happen before any images or any CSS or any other script is loaded. So if we save it and say Yakov, click say it, as you can see, we still have our functionality working just as before. Except this time, we didn't have to put all this code at the very end when all the elements have loaded already. Instead, we're listening for the event when all those elements have loaded. And in that case, we're able to execute these functions and get element by ID and be sure that these elements already exist in the document object model.